Recording in progress. That means we can start. Welcome everybody. Tonight we're going to have an English spoken session. So if there's topics you can't understand, feel free to write it in the chat. Als er iets bij is wat je niet kan verstaan, schrijf het gerust even in de chat en dan zullen we het voor je vertalen. For the rest, you are muted. If you have any specific questions, feel free to write them in the chat. And then it only leaves, the only thing I have to do left is to introduce a wonderful Jules McConnell from Australia. So it's 6 o'clock in the morning over there. So she's really getting up really, really early for us. Thank you for that, Jules. And I let her introduce herself. Today's topic is about Tandem. Welcome, Jules, and the word is yours.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for having me here. Yes, it's nice and early in the morning. Good to see some familiar faces. And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Jules McConnell. I've been jumping for 26 years, about 11,000 jumps, and about 3,500 of them are tandems. And I've been a canopy coach for about 15 years. Most of what I'm going to cover tonight for you may seem pretty obvious, but I hope that you can take something away. And there might be stuff that you've never considered before or something that you haven't for some time, because it's the simple things that get overlooked that can turn a normal jump into an incident. And for those who are more experienced tandem instructors or senior instructors, or even course presenters, thinking about this information from a point of view of educating the less experienced tandem instructors. So Mike and Philip asked me to present to you tonight. I met Mike in 2019 when he was in Australia, when I presented a tandem workshop. So I'll share my screen because I've got a bit of a PowerPoint presentation to show you. So a bit of a background. I delivered this tandem workshop in 2018 and 19 to about 39 drop zones in Australia and another 9 in New Zealand. And my background, like I said, is canopy. So it was mainly focused on canopy related incidents, but we did bring up some other topics. We had a couple of fatalities in Australia at the time. But the big takeouts that I got from traveling around Australia were some inconsistent approaches on landings, dealing with turbulence, inconsistent harnessing of students, and inexperienced instructors trying to mimic what advanced instructors were doing without proper guidance. And this stuff will really relate when you actually see the statistics in another slide. The New Zealand observations I saw, the New Zealand statistics for injuries weren't nearly as high as Australia. And the takeouts that I could see for reasons potentially why is the use of double toggle or single to 8 brake lines for a better flare. Now, more than half of Australia's drop zones, and especially the ones that are very busy, are using single to 6 brake line configuration, which don't give as powerful a flare. Also in New Zealand, they don't do big hook turns. In Australia, most drop zones sort of stick to 90 degrees, but we do see some bigger turns in Australia, which there was a contentious talk of banning at some time, but they haven't. But we're not seeing a lot of injuries from big turns. It's more from inconsistent approaches. But it just was an observation. Also ceasing operations in turbulent conditions. I noticed Australia tends to push a bit harder in not so favourable weather conditions, whereas New Zealand would stop. Sitting down landings in nil winds and strong winds, that was really obvious in New Zealand, whereas in Australia, we tend to see instructors trying to run out fast landings, which, in nil winds, which is obviously very hard when you've got a passenger on the front. And quite often you'd see the instructor sort of fall on top of the student and either injure their back or their students. Buddy checks was another big one, which we saw more frequent in New Zealand than in Australia. We've introduced buddy checks since then in Australia. And breath testing all staff at the beginning of operations. That was a big one to combat fatigue management. And also fatigue management, having regular breaks, particularly some of the drop zones in New Zealand and Australia, they're doing, 15 to 20 jumps a day, and having those regular breaks every 5 hours that they actually put in place in New Zealand. You could see that certainly helped refresh the instructors. And then ongoing training. What I noticed since the Tandem, these workshops that I ran in Australia, our incident rates dropped by over 35%. And so that was noticeable that ongoing education is really important. So I'm glad that you're all here tonight to continue educating yourselves and just being reminded of the simple things. Like I said, that's what sometimes we forget, particularly when we're jumping on busy days. Next slide. Oh, what's going on here? Maybe down. Nope. Okay, so some statistics. Philip has been kind enough to share me some of your incident statistics, and I've also updated our Australian statistics. The New Zealand ones I have here are from those workshops from back in 2019. I didn't get a chance to get some updated ones, but they're still pretty relevant. So for reserve activations in Belgium, there was one reserve per 500 tandem jumps. Now, most of them were from 2017 and 18. Your reserve activations per jump are definitely less now, but that was over the whole span of the 5 years. In Australia, it's about 1 in 1,600, and Philip mentioned that in the Netherlands, it's about 1 in 2,000. So whether that's packing or could be gear maintenance, I'm not really sure, but that's something to consider, which we do touch on later down the track in my workshop. The instructor serious injuries in Belgium, 1 in 8,700. And when I say serious injury, that's a broken or fractured bone. So there's a lot more injuries of just sprained ankles, but we're looking at sort of more serious injuries statistics. In Australia, about 1 in 48,000, and in New Zealand, about 1 in 48,000. So, that's pretty good odds. We do a lot more jumps in New Zealand and Australia than in Belgium. So, the fact that there was only 1 in 5 years in Belgium is fantastic, even though we don't like to see anyone be injured. And in Australia and New Zealand, it's about a couple a year. And then for our student serious injuries, there weren't any in Belgium, which is fantastic. So no actual broken bones. Whereas in Australia, it's about 1 in 5,000, which is really significant compared to your stats and the stats in New Zealand, where it's about 1 in 24,000 jumps. So that's where we can certainly improve what we do. And like most of those serious injuries are all canopy related. So that's why I was asked to travel around and run these canopy related workshops. Now, because I noticed in your statistics that most of them weren't canopy related, I've sort of adjusted my workshop to look at more, sort of other factors. And we can talk about canopy related stuff at the end if we have time. So just some takeouts from the Australian incident statistics. Over 50% of these incidents reported fine or good conditions. 47% did involve weather, though, whether it was sink, turbulence, or gusts. Now, when we read sink in the Tandem, in the incident reports, quite often I think of, like I mentioned before, a lot of our instructors do turns to come in, and they might be going through that cycle. We'll go into maybe some detail about that later on in the workshop, but essentially, if you make a turn or if you do a braked approach on finals, and as the canopy, ideally, the canopy comes up from that either braked approach, planes out, and that's right as you're flaring. But if you initiate the maneuver a little bit too high, and the canopy is planed right out. Now it goes back into its next cycle of going into full drive, and it hasn't picked up its full speed, and we need to flare at that point. That's when, you know, we feel like there is sink, or it feels turbulent, but it can be in good conditions, but it's actually, you know, a pilot induced sink. And so, and I did observe that around the country. And again, what I noticed in Australia was, because of the single six configuration with of the tandem canopy, the flare wasn't as powerful coming out of this, you know, in that sort of dead zone. Whereas in New Zealand, I'd see a very similar approach, and they would get away with it because of that more powerful flare, and not have as hard a landing. And then we saw, you know, 17% of these incidents, a student made a complaint at a later time after an uneventful landing. We do have litigation over here. So quite often, you know, it could be people just trying to get money out of this, our Parachute Federation. We've seen in the last sort of 5 years over $1 million in claims each year, and a lot of it, and then some of those claims are being fought out in court, and and it's just the legal fees that we're paying. But then some we are paying out to the individuals because the tandem master was at fault. So that's things that we need to consider. We've really got to be careful. 26 of the injuries involved students at fault, so dropping their legs. Now this could be, you know, poor instruction, or it could be poor harnessing, and they couldn't actually get their legs up for landing. 32% involved the tandem master clearly at fault, like I explained before, a misjudged or an awkward landing when they come out of that that turn or that braked approach a bit too early and don't have enough speed for a powerful flare. 6% of the jumps were made by people over 50, yet 46% of total serious injuries occurred to people over 50. So that's something that is a big takeout. We've really got to consider when we're taking older passengers. We've got to take extra care with those people because they are more frail. Their bones aren't as dense. So we've really got to think about the conditions that we're jumping with these older passengers, as well as harnessing them correctly. And making sure, you know, we're probably not giving them with the inexperienced instructor. Although one takeout, you know, something else that I haven't written down here, both currency and the instructor's experience level weren't a factor in any of the injuries. It's really across the board. There's no obvious, it's a lot of the less experienced instructors, or it's instructors who are uncurrent. It's really a broad spectrum, and which just goes to show that, you know, at any time you can have an injury, and you've just got to be careful on every single jump. I'll bring up the chat, which I can't see at the moment. So, yeah, should I just answer questions as we go along?
Yeah.
While they come up?
We can answer them right now. So what benefit does a single brake configuration give? Is it that obvious that there are more accidents that way? Why don't we go for a double?
Yeah, interesting. That's a great question. And what I did when I went around the country, I took data from every drop zone, whether they used single six, this is in Australia, or double eight, or even single eight. And it's about a 50-50 split. About half of our drop zones use single six and about half use double eight. But out of the single six, they're probably the drop zones that are doing a lot more jumps. And when you actually look at it at a per jump incident rate, it's almost the same. So as much as, you know, my observations and what I can see, and from having jumped both configurations myself, it's quite obvious that the flare is much better in the dual or the 8 braked line configuration. And I did present that at a workshop at the Australian conference in 2019. We didn't have a lot of CIs attend that conference. And since then, I haven't been back around the country. So this year, my plan is to go back around the country and explain the takeouts that I got from the workshops, because we feel that a lot of CIs, you know, they might come to the conference, but they might not go to all the workshops and get the information that's really important. So we actually have to go, you know, to them individually and educate them. So hopefully I can do that and actually show them, you know, the videos of you know, similar landings in both New Zealand, or sorry, similar approaches in both New Zealand and Australia, and the difference in the outcome of a flare. And that might get them to change their minds and go to double brakes. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, the numbers don't lie. So, you know, when they sort of see that, oh, well, it's the same injury rate, you know, they sort of go, well, it doesn't really matter, but any injury is an injury. So I think if we can reduce them, we're in a better position. And what I think the big takeout, and I guess what I also see and observe from the reasons why those injury rates are similar is that the drop zones that are using the double eights in Australia are sort of inland where the conditions aren't as great. And so that's why they're using those that configuration to get a better flare, whereas most of the coastal drop zones are using the single six, where the conditions are pretty favourable most of the time, and most of the incidents are sort of human error. So whether the double brakes would fix that or not, I think they still would. It's just a matter of going around to those drop zones and sort of hammering it to them. So we'll look at some considerations and factors affecting incidents around Australia and around the world. We'll look at human factors, safety culture, equipment, passengers, their harness and types, some emergencies, and then if we have time, about canopy control. So first up, sorry, my computer, oh, there we go. Oh, it's a bit of a lag for me to go to the next slide. So human factors, according to the International Civil Aviation Organization, human error is the single most serious threat to aviation safety. So, you know, and that's not just in skydiving, it's aviation in general. So factors to consider while skydiving to minimize risk are your currency, fatigue, stress, adequate and ongoing training like this. And like I said before, it's obvious, you know, our incident rates dropped by 35% just by running workshops around the country. So we really need to do that on a regular basis. Boredom and complacency. When I ran around the country, we've got lots of instructors who are full-time instructors. Now I understand in Belgium, most of you are part-time and just jumping on weekends. In Australia, you know, some of the guys are jumping 5, 6, sometimes even 7 days a week. And like I said, you know, 10 to 15 jumps a day. So boredom and complacency can really set in Australia, and that can lead to incidents happening. And then cognitive bias, if you understand that, it's where you see something so many times, like every day you're checking your gear and you're checking it 10, 15 times a day, you start to look at it as though it is right. So some of our incidents have involved, you know, poor gear checks, and they haven't been picked up on buddy checks either. We're lucky we haven't had any fatalities from, you know, 3 rings being misrouted, but there have been in other countries worldwide, and there certainly have been incidents or situations where equipment has been jumped that's been misrouted, but it has been picked up later and fixed before there was a serious incident. But it's really important that we, you know, when we're checking our equipment, that we're looking for problems and that we're not just checking it, you know, blasely, or if we're getting distracted during our gear check, that we stop and either start again or stop the distraction, complete your gear check, and then go on.
What you're actually saying is people are overlooking the obvious.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. Yep, we've picked up people who haven't had their AEDs turned on, you know, and that could just be, you know, mismanagement of some, like there's quite a few of our operations that they jump in a different location to where they go to the airport. So they have to take a bus ride to the airport and then they jump in a different location. So everyone does a gear check in the morning and puts their equipment on the bus, but then they might take a different set of equipment off the bus. So if one person's sort of routine is to turn the AED on at the airport, but the other one's to turn it on at the landing area, then even though they're at the same elevation, yeah, there can be, and you know, one person's checking their equipment before they put it on the bus, one's checking it after they take it off the bus. Yeah, this is where, you know, complacency and just little things like that can catch you. So it's important that, you know, we have a routine and everyone on the team has the same routine, so things like that don't get overlooked. And also buddy checks. So yeah, when do we do buddy checks? So buddy checks mandatory in Belgium, or do you do them over there?
No.
No.
No, I don't think they're not quite common, to be honest.
Okay. We've found that since doing buddy checks and we're recommending them, we're not mandating them in Australia. We're trying to reduce the amount of rules that we have. We think it should be common practice. And the reason being, like I said before, they have picked up problems that could have been a serious incident later. And it's not just checking your container and your rig, it's also checking the student harness. And I think, you know, like I said before, poor harnessing of students have caused lots of serious injuries in Australia, particularly where it's a bit of a lazy harnessing and the student hangs low in the harness. Also, we had a recent fatality just last year in Australia from a Y-mod being hooked up on the Cessna, on the step of a Cessna. That could have easily been picked up from a buddy check, and that was a double fatality, which is really sad, and shouldn't have happened. So yeah, when to do your buddy checks: before implaning, in the plane, or both. I mean, definitely before you get in the plane. And like I said, explaining, yep, to pick up something that's missed on your gear check or changed whilst in the aircraft. It also instills confidence in the passenger. I know we have a bit of a culture in Australia of she'll be right, mate. But when passengers see the instructors looking after each other, it makes them feel a lot more confident. Even when you're talking your passenger through gearing up and, you know, and doing your own checks on the passenger, I find that really makes them feel a lot calmer and sets you up for a better skydiver with your passenger who isn't as nervous. And the other, there was a bit of a pushback on introducing buddy checks from some really experienced instructors. They thought that they would look as though they were being incompetent as opposed to, you know, in front of their students, but it's quite the opposite. It's looking like you are professional, and that you're taking care not only of your instructor and your teammate, but also the students. And yeah, instilling good communication amongst teams. You know, if we can get rid of this sort of, I won't bring that up because they should know that already. You know, that's really poor practice. We should be open about our communication, and being able to accept, you know, criticism from our teammates. And don't take it as a criticism, just take it as an oversight. You know, we're human, we all make mistakes. And if we make it a routine, just like our own gear check, then we should be able to, it should just become second nature. It also breaks down barriers of inexperienced instructors jumping with experienced instructors, and getting rid of their, you know, the egos. And yeah, like I said, human error is a serious threat. So it's one way of overcoming this.
But
And other
there's probably no egos in skydiving, right?
No, none at all. And look, other industries do cross-referencing checks, you know, pilots, doctors, scuba diving, and it's been proven to save lives. So when we debrief ourselves after each jump, you know, we want to think, how was my exit? How was my free fall procedures? How was my opening? How was my circuit? How was my landing? How was my accuracy? How is my energy? You know, do I need a drink? Do I need a snack? Have I prepared myself for the day with all of that to keep me going? And how was my customer's experience? Really important that we think about that on every single jump. In our free fall, is it mandatory for you to do, you know, your circle of awareness checks? So checking all your handles in the correct order. Does everyone do that?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And Philip and Mike mentioned to me, we had a little chat last week, that you don't do handycam in Belgium.
Well, when we're talking Belgium, we're talking about our part of the federation, because we're a complex country. We do the north of Belgium, the Flemish Federation, and there it is not allowed. In the south of Belgium, which is on certain parts a little bit more commercialized, they do so, but in the north we don't. No. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, something that was brought up in our from traveling around the country and running these tandem workshops was with the handycam. We noticed a lot of instructors weren't doing their checks, that they were only doing them on non-handycam jumps. But obviously having that glove with the camera on, you know, it can make a difference into how you, particularly in winter when there's your instructor and passenger are both wearing thick jumpers and it's a bit harder to find your handles. You know, really important to be doing our checks even with the handycam on. You know, a lot of instructors thinks it takes away from the video of the the skydive, but you know, a couple of seconds where the person's face isn't in shot doesn't make a difference to the passenger, particularly if it's going to save their lives. And then when we're debriefing our peers, obviously we want to be doing buddy checks. We want to share the workload. We're definitely responsible for each other's safety and looking after each other. So don't be afraid to speak up. And if you see something, say something. And adhering to, you know, SMS safety management practice and hazard prevention. So something else I noticed around the country is lots of experienced instructors who carry just not injuries, and really there is really common tandem related injuries around the country. Bad shoulders, wrists, lower backs. So what we did was we got a tandem instructor who's also an exercise physiologist, and she created a toolkit, a fitness and injury prevention toolkit, and that's available, and it's for tandem instructors specifically. So some different exercises that you can do to work up the muscles. And that you regularly use through lifting up rigs, through throwing the drogue, handy cam, steering and landing. And so that's a little toolkit that's on our website, and I can share that link with you if you like. And also, yeah, I did notice, you know, some junior instructors really not thinking about and senior instructors as well, not even thinking about their bodies, and, you know, throwing rigs on their shoulders, you know, 10, 20 times a day, rather than putting it on a bench and lifting it up. So there's also in that toolkit some best practice of, you know, how to put your rig on, of how to hold your canopy, you know, rather than hanging it over one shoulder, walking back from the landing area, you know, bunching it up and putting it, you know, carrying it with two arms. Also hearing problems, that jumping all the time with the aircraft noise and the free fall noise. So lots of older instructors tend to not wear hearing protection but have really bad hearing, and the newer instructors are learning from that, and we're noticing that younger instructors are definitely using ear protection more than just from lessons learnt from older instructors. So that's definitely something to think about if you want to stay in this game a long time, is look after yourself. This is your tool. You know, we're using equipment that gets worn out all the time, the canopies and the but don't forget your own body. That's your number one tool, and you need to be thinking about that to keep yourself.
The tunnel generation grew up with ear protection, so they kind of get used to it, I guess. But indeed, it's something that we advise strongly within the federation to use ear protection.
Oh, that's awesome. That's really good to hear. I can't see the chat anymore, so I'm not sure if there are any other questions at all.
No, we're fine.
Okay, awesome. So thinking about equipment, what equipment we use. Some drop zones around Australia have different size canopies and even different types. And I noticed that in New Zealand, like they have hops and gyros. Most of Australia have gyros, the New Zealand Aerosports canopies. Some use Sigmas as well. But the majority are either gyros or the precision. And one thing I did observe in drop zones around Australia there were very few, but there are a couple of drop zones that had both configurations, both single 6 and double 8. And I said, no, just one, one type only, because if you're chopping and changing equipment, you want to have the same configuration on every single jump so that you don't have to change what you're doing. But even so, if you've got a fleet of equipment, I don't know, what is it in Belgium? Are you doing lots of jumps? I think you mentioned like some places are doing 10 jumps a day. So would you be packing yourself on every jump, or do you have lots?
Most of the time, indeed, we pack our canopies, our tandem canopies ourselves. So we don't have that many tandem packers. So most of the time it is packed ourselves. And if it's packed by a tandem packer, then you're probably going to jump that same gear again. We don't have a culture of back-to-back or factory culture in that sense.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. Maybe that's where your higher reserve rate came from, maybe just from fatigue of the instructors doing lots of jumps in a day and packing for themselves. Maybe. Yeah, but even, and then gear checks as well. So the instructors doing the gear checks.
Well, they are responsible for their gear, so yes.
Yeah, sure. And then, so thinking about, the age and condition and how often the gear checks are done. Obviously, you're packing it all the time, but are you keeping a log of how many jumps that equipment does? Yeah, and all that. When things need to be replaced.
There is per drop zone, there is somebody responsible for the gear, and they keep an eye on that to see if it needs to be replaced or fixed or whatever. Okay,
well, that's good. Because that's one thing that it's definitely before we didn't have a great sort of reserve activation to jump rate, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but certainly around the country now our systems are better, especially at those factories where the packers are really looking after the gear and regularly maintaining them, and making sure that there is a system and it's stuck to. Very good.
I think the major challenge we probably have within the federation is currency, to be honest. A lot of our instructors don't do more than 50 to 100 tandems a year. I think the average will be around that somewhere, maybe even lower.
Yeah, okay.
So sometimes we even have instructors struggling with achieving their 25 minimum tandems a year.
Yeah, right. And is that just because they're not at the drop zone every weekend, or you just don't have the numbers of tandems coming through?
Both. Sometimes it is availability, but sometimes it's indeed not being present every weekend in order to be able to jump. And we are also not commercially set up. So it means that there is, of course, a lower demand, or at least a lower offering from out of the clubs from that perspective. So it is fun jumpers first, and then the rest.
Yeah. Okay. I often wish it was a bit more like that here. I do work at a drop zone that is predominantly student oriented, where we have it's an APF school with tandems on the side, and so it's predominantly AFF and sport jumping happening here. So yeah, I guess currency is a big one. Is there a certain time between, like, that you need to do a recurrency jump, like if you haven't done a tandem for a certain amount of time?
Well, to be honest with you, in the past we never gave a lot of attention to that, because the fact that most of the time people got to do their regular jumps, but due to COVID, and we had longer times of inactivity, we start paying more attention to that, and now we just follow the rules of the manufacturers.
Okay.
So we kind of tend to ask people now to, specifically also due to the long period in COVID, we asked them to do a recertification jump with a experienced skydiver. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, well, that's certainly what we did too through COVID. A lot of places were shut down for more than 3 months, and that's ours is 90 days if you haven't done a tandem within 90 days. And then we actually ended up with a bit of a matrix. The longer you'd been out and with the lesser amount of tandems, the more recurrency jumps you had to do, and whether it was with an instructor or with a passenger on the front, or sorry, not an experienced jumper. A lot of the tandem factories, they had to do it with each other, and I think that's a good way, because you can get better feedback from another tandem instructor than from an experienced jumper when you're doing a recurrency jump. So talking about passenger harnessing, there's a really good video that was done at the British Parachutes Association. It's on YouTube. I can send you the link if you don't have it as well. And that was done by Tom Noonan. It's quite a few years ago now. But yeah, a good landing for your passenger starts with correctly adjusting the harness. And it's also so important to get that Y-mod, snug, so that it isn't a snag. Are there any small Cessna drop zones in Belgium?
Yes.
No, yes. I'm getting no's and yeses. Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely something to consider, that the harness is fitted snugly and it's harnessed correctly so that they don't hang low, so that the first point of contact isn't their lower back. And that's what we've found in our incidents, that we are getting a significant amount of lower back injuries from our students, because the first point of contact is their backside and not the instructor's feet. And also so that they can get their legs up for landing. So do your instructors gear up the passengers? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Obviously, like, I'm not seeing, any incidents there, but there were some not in your incident trends, legs up for landing. I'm not sure whether it was, the student dropping their feet, or whether they couldn't get their feet up. But that was something that I noticed a handful of your incidents. So something to consider, is it the way that you're harnessing the student so that it makes it difficult for them to get their legs up, or was it the fact that they just dropped their feet? Or was it the passenger type that, they weren't physically able to get their legs up for landing? Is that something that you do in your briefing, that you confirm with the student that they can get their legs up for landing before they jump?
No, we basically just sit them down on the ground and have them lift their legs, but I guess it doesn't give the same validation that chains or something would do. Sure.
Yeah, look, a lot of drop zones in Australia don't use chains like they do in South Australia, where you were, Mikey. But I think we always get them just to sit on the ground or sit on a bench and sort of hang and hold up the harness from behind and get them to try it. And particularly if, you know, they are older or overweight, or look like they can't, but it should be done on for every student. So so that you know, and that they're confident they can do that as well. I have seen a question come up in the chat.
Yep.
Any tips on what techniques a TI can use when the student drops their legs on final? Well, you know, if they do it right at the end, it's really hard, you know, but I think about when I'm coming into land, I'll try and, as I'm flaring, sort of push my hips forwards, so that their legs actually come up a little bit more, and then also have my legs coming up underneath their legs, so that we can, if we're sliding, then their feet are on sort of the shin of my legs here, and that can certainly help. Yeah, so that's a matter of harnessing the student correctly so that you can do that. I am quite short, so I'm really picky about how I harness my students. I have, for tall students, you know, their head's up here. And so it's a bit hard to see, but it just means that at least their bottom isn't below my knees, and then I can't actually assist them. So it's important that you're getting that harnessing right. And like I said, definitely, as at the finish of every flare, if you can push your hips forwards and get your legs underneath theirs, that's sort of the best advice I can give. And then if they're really struggling to get their legs up, and you've noticed that while they're harnessing, while you're practicing up high under canopy, you can get them to sort of adjust their leg straps sort of down around their thighs, so they're a bit more seated, and then they're actually already, because the half of the battle is just getting their knees up, and it's how you tell them to do it too. It's knees up, then feet up, as opposed to just doing a straight leg lift, which is much harder for a not so fit person to do. It's much easier with a bent knee to get their knee up and then point their toes. If they're still struggling, you know, I know some drop zones have pants with handles on them to aid students, like they can actually lift the legs with the handles on the pants. And then I have opted for, when I've had a student who couldn't get their legs up, for landing, actually landing slightly crosswind, and so that, and then leaning back, and then rather than sliding in feet first where their foot could potentially catch, I'm actually going crosswind, and then as my feet touch down, I actually try and turn back around, and then I'm sliding sort of backwards, and so there's less likely chance that our feet get caught on any sort of tuft of grass or anything. It is a bit of an advanced maneuver, but if, yeah, I mean, we should all be able to do crosswind landings and be able to do flare turns as well. So that can be.
So practice on your blind man.
That's right. TY. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. What have we got next? Tandem passengers. So passenger type versus tandem master experience. I touched on this before when we were looking at the incident trends. You know, so when we're considering age, you know, older or bigger passengers, or passengers with a disability, you definitely want your more senior and current instructors taking them. One drop zone I went to, they actually have a sort of a staging for their tandem progression. So for the beginner tandem instructors, they sort of treat them like an A license. So they only can go up in 15 knots or like a student until they get their first 20 tandems. Then they can go up in more condition, like then they get their, you know, sort of B license, and then they can go in 20 knots. And then once they've done 100 tandems, then they can go in sort of in the max conditions. So that's something to consider on experience levels and looking after your lesser experienced instructors, as well as the weight limit. Obviously, starting out as an instructor, you know, it's getting used to that muscle memory of how to flare. It's definitely technique, but it does come over time. And so starting that good technique on smaller passengers will definitely make it easier. Unless, you know, you are a big, you know, a bodybuilder, then, but I would certainly not be giving, you know, very big passengers to lesser experienced instructors or instructors just starting out.
Maybe one question related to that, because there was actually a quote of you in the Tandem Master Manual of the APF saying that don't put more pressure on yourself because you're surrounded by, I'm going to change the word, by egos, not so much by males, but be true to yourself, your experience and your abilities. And I think that's also what you're referring to. If you don't feel yourself comfortable with the passenger that you're allocated to, then speak up.
Absolutely. And you're right on there, Mark. And that's something I was going to say is that like since doing the tandem workshops, I was traveling around the country and not doing as many tandems as what I was, you know, used to. I was sort of, you know, full-time. I have been a full-time tandem instructor at a tandem factory. I've sort of backed away from that. Now I'm at the school where, you know, we might do, you know, 6 tandems on a week, like on a weekend, maybe more, maybe less, but only a handful during the week. And then for a while there, I wasn't doing many at all because I was traveling around running these workshops. So when I came back home, and I said, look, you know, if you can just limit me, ideally no handycam, and, you know, nothing more than 85 kilos. Anyway, they had a busy day, and there was a group, that's right, it was a group of 5, and they only had 4 instructors, and they said, oh, Jules, would really, you know, could use you on this jump. And I had the option, I didn't want handycam because I thought that overloads me. And they had a 90 kilo person or a 90-year-old. So I went, well, I'm going to go for the 90 kilo because, you know, they were fit and strong. And I thought an extra 5 kilos, you know, when they carry their weight well, it's very different taking a 90 kilo sort of short, wide person as opposed to a 90 kilo tall, fit person. And I thought I'm feeling much more confident taking that person than taking a 90-year-old. I mean, I could, you know, I felt confident enough that I could jump. If I didn't feel confident, I wouldn't have taken either. But that's something to consider, you know, choose wisely. And yeah, if you're not feeling confident at all, then say no, because, you know, the last thing you want is to injure someone just because you felt like you were pressured into doing it. Or you felt like you had to stand up to the other boys. And, yeah, there's been several times when the weather hasn't been great or my eyesight isn't really great as it gets darker during the day. And so I pull myself off the last couple of loads of the day just because my eyesight and my flare timing isn't great. Do we have another question? Smile, thank you. And taking people with disabilities, does that happen? Is that common practice or at all?
Not really. There's not so many. We have purchased a specific harness, so you could actually help people in getting their legs up or those kind of things. But it doesn't really happen that often.
Yeah, we have the same. There are some drop zones that don't take them. They've had bad situations, or they don't have instructors who are experienced enough to take them. And then we have other drop zones that do, and they have special harnesses to help the passenger get their legs up, and actually it's sort of a strap around their legs and clips onto their harness under canopy. But you've really got to, if you're taking someone with disabilities, really important that the conditions are absolutely perfect. We actually had someone recently here in a wheelchair. We had to tell them to come back because it was only 0 to 5 knots and the wind just wasn't strong enough. You know, we want at least 10 to 15 knots, but nothing more than that, and smooth conditions. Yeah, it's really important that you're not coming in really fast, but also that you're not coming in and you're relying on the catchers to catch you. So that 10 to 15 knots is ideal to get that nice flare and a nice sit down landing. Emergencies. So there's still the most common cause of fatalities worldwide with tandems is out of sequence deployment. So important that we practice our emergency procedures on every jump, which we touched on earlier. You know, there's the flow chart from UPT. I find that quite convoluted. You know, I like to keep my EPs quite simple, you know, but as long as we're practicing our handles and pulling them in the correct order. And then thinking about other scenarios like, you know, the cameraman caught in the drogue, you know, just that same side down, RSL cutaway, then your main activation, and that we're putting ourselves, you know, mentally through those scenarios every now and again. Off drop zone landings. So that was something that in your incident reports, there were quite a few of, and we talked about, well, who spots the load? Is it the DSO or is it the pilot? At most of our drop zones, we have the DSO communicate with the pilot. Quite often, on the tandem factories, the DSO sits up the front next to the pilot, listens to the wind calls, and then makes the spot according to what the winds are doing on the way up. So in the morning, the pilot does wind checks, you know, at 1,000, 2,000 and 4,000. And then again, maybe once or twice more up on the climb to height. It's good because you do need to take into account free fall drift on those windy days. But yeah, we do rely on the DSO communicating with the pilot, and we don't rely on the weather forecast because they're not always right. Yeah, some places, you know, some of our coastal drop zones, it's really important that we get the spot right because we don't want people in the ocean. And also if the weather changes, if there's a significant, you know, storm that comes through and we have to shut down operations for an hour or two, then we make sure that we get those wind checks again on the way up, so that, because the weather can easily change. And considerations for, you know, do you have cloud manuals over? Do you jump in cloud or do you have to be visual?
No, we are allowed to jump above 3,000 feet in clouds from 13 to 3,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, same here. Sometimes, you know, we can't do a visual spot out the door, but something to consider, you know, when we're jumping out of bigger planes, if we're out last, which generally tandem instructors are, you know, to open high so that we can make it back. If you do see that you're long, you know, I don't know if it's acceptable practice to go around, but certainly at drop zones here in Australia, if the spot's too deep, then we get the pilot to go around. And yeah, particularly here, we've got lots of students, APF students, and we have a big ocean out there. So we're really particular about our weather and getting the spot right. And it sounded like that your off-drop zone landings didn't cause injury, but it does, you know, that's when it can happen, when, you know, lots more things that you have to consider. Line twists, that was something that I noticed as well, how people get out of line twists. We already discussed the passenger problems, so we won't go on there, but the next slide has a video of how to get out of line twists. So back in the old days, it was pull them apart and kick. When we're talking about doing tandems, I tell my passenger to arch. I find that really helps because when they're hanging forwards, and you know, if they can get their weight underneath the center of the twist, it can really help get the twists out. So getting them to go back into an arch position. I have heard of it works even better than helping them kick with you. And if you look at, this is just a solo tandem getting out. Oh, this isn't a tandem getting out of line twist. It's just a solo person, but the same way to do this. for a tandem is actually, yeah, grabbing the risers and pushing them together. I've heard of some instructors, you know, untwisting from the risers, and it can be really useful. So yeah, grabbing the risers, untwisting the risers, and then getting out of the line twist that way. I've heard of lots of instructors using this technique with tandems and it working. Obviously, you know, things to consider are the spot and your altitude always, and it's not, you know, a rotating, a really violent malfunction as well as the line twist. But if it is just line twist, then I think those two factors, they're getting the passenger to arch and also trying to twist the risers together as opposed to the old school pulling them apart and kicking. That might help get yourself out of the line twist. And then the obvious prevention of it is better packing technique. Look, I've got lots more I could talk about, but that was the main factors. So, and we're already, you know, coming up to, I don't know what time is it over there at 7 o'clock our time. I think I'm going to have to come back again and talk about all the canopy stuff that I've got as well to offer.
Is there anything you would like to share with us? Because we are currently, of course, not really active. I mean, we had one weekend where we could jump until now. Since we introduced the practice that, first of all, everybody needs to do 5 jumps, non-instruction jumps before we do instruction. Is there anything you would like to share with us that you think we should take along before we start doing instruction jumps?
Yeah, I definitely think for people who haven't jumped for a while, then, you know, to do a recurrency jump, absolutely. And like I said before, you know, you only know in yourself. You can't compare yourself to any other instructor on your team. We're all individuals, we're all different. And some of us, you know, sometimes we can just be having a bad day. And if you're not feeling great within yourself, and you're just not feeling the vibe, you know, like I said before, don't be afraid to say no. And then for the lesser experienced people or the lesser current, then, you know, make sure that you get current again, get confident. And those lesser experienced people, you know, definitely take advice from the senior instructors, and you know, don't take it as criticism, just take it, it's a learning. We're always learning, all of us, on every single jump. I don't know it all. I definitely don't have all the answers. I still feel like a small fish in a really big pond. And I think that's the attitude to have, is that we're always learning, and just enjoy the experience with every tandem passenger. And someone said to me, treat your tandem passenger like you're taking your mum. So that's how we should be thinking about it, and really looking after them.
Great, thanks a lot for your valuable insights, Jules. If there's any questions, feel free to put them in the chat now. Jules is going to share some links with us that we will share with you guys on our chat. That leaves us to do one more thing, Jules, which we do on every evening. And I don't think he is available tonight.
I will do it.
You, Philip, will do it. So we spin the wheel and you can get a free jump for your participating. And if you win, Jules, you'll have to do it. Come to do it in Belgium.
Moment. And I'm going to take control.
In the meantime, there is another question, Jules. Like, which canopies are used in Australia?
I'm just sending through a couple of links. This is the tandem harnessing one, and then I'll just get the fitness and injury prevention one, and then I'll answer your question. Hang on a sec. Where did I get it? Oh, here. And this is the fitness and injury prevention. Question was, which tandems are used mainly in Australia, or the canopies?
Canopies, yes.
Yeah, I would say mostly NZ Aerosports, the gyro, ranging from 300 to 330s and 365s. Like I said, some are single 6 and some are single 8 or dual 8. I have seen some precision and some Sigma, but I would say the majority are the NZ Aerosports gyro canopy. How about you there in Belgium? What do you predominantly use?
It's the same. We use the NZ canopies as well.
365, all 365s.
Okay, all 365s. Yeah.
But we're also going to definitely look into the buddy system. That's a good tip that you gave us. So we'll definitely look into that as well.
Yeah, awesome.
Philippe, are you ready to spin the wheel?
Yes, I am. If everything is fine, you should be able to see the wheel now.
Yep.
And I'll spin it. And not everybody on the wheel is in the meeting. And I don't know, Maverick, are you in? Where is that? Can you check? Yep, Maverick, you're the lucky winner. We'll make David registers all the jumps. So congratulations. And Maverick is not yet a tandem master, but one of the tandem packers.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Jules. I hope you have a great day. Maybe you can do a jump today.
It's raining out there. I don't think we're going to be jumping anytime soon, unfortunately.
Okay, great.
Well, I'm going to go home and feed my dog. He's still in bed.
Okay,
right.
Jules.
Thanks, everybody,
Thank
and
you.
we'll see each other tomorrow, same time for the next session. Bye-bye.
Bye.